Welcome everybody to the Fairy World Circuit Cypher Seasonal Cup. My name is Atmaz, the community manager for Abraham. This will be the competition between the 32 highest point earners from the months of October to December of 2018 in the Fairy World Circuit. You can find out more about that at esports.fairy.com. We'll be kicking off the new year with this $2,500 competition. Today's winner gets $1,250. Second place, $750, and then you go $400 and $100 for third and fourth. Today's format will be the best of 5 in the Crucible format, and if you're curious what that means, we'll explain it to you as we go. As a reminder, you can earn prizes today just by watching the stream and linking your Twitch account to Faria. Instructions for that can be found in the stream chat. You can win chests and, of course, the egg avatar. And the egg avatar this weekend will be hatching. You'll probably already see that in game if you've logged in today. You'll have a little incubator and it will hatch your egg into a random avatar. And today is pretty special because we have brand new hatchlings that you may have seen on our blog post. You don't have to look, you can just be surprised. There's some pretty cool ones. A lot of them are designed by previous tournament winners. So with all that said, I think we're just going to get started with our first match, which is going to be Dilgarno versus LIEKA in the round of 32. And I'm going to hand it right over to Scorch and Frosty, who'll be picking up the commentary. Take it away, guys.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Season of Cypher Seasonal Cup. I'm joined today by the lovely Scorch. How you feeling today, Scorch? It's been a long 3 months since the last Seasonal Cup. What do you think we're going to see today?
I am ready for this one. It's super interesting just to see kind of how everything has developed. The last cup that we had was right through some of the expansions coming out. So, at the time, I kind of always talk about, well, there hasn't been a lot of time for these players to experiment with a lot of things. And since then, we've had so much time in between. We've had a few changes to even those cards. And now we have kind of a very developed and set meta. And every time I think that, somebody brings out something new and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Dilgarno is definitely one to bring some interesting lists. He did very well with the green-yellow Flyers list not too long ago in one of the opens, placing top 4, I believe. So it's going to be really cool to see if he brings that same list and tries a similar strategy. But I believe that these players are actually ready to hop into the match. So I think we're just about ready to get this on the road.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Dilgarno is one of those names that's been around for a long time in Fairy Esports. LIEKA has been around, I think, for a little while now, at least seeing the name within the Discord. But I believe this is potentially the first actual kind of competitive experience. I'm not 100% sure on if there's been an open that LIEKA's played in or anything like that. But it'll be interesting to see one of the longtime veterans versus potentially an up-and-comer.
Oh, absolutely. I think with all that said, I think we're about ready to hop into this one. What do you think?
I'm ready. We got both players in, so I would expect that they're ready.
All right.
Should mention briefly for anyone who has never tuned into a Fairy Esports event before, we use a format called the Crucible here. Basically means that each player will have 4 decks. There will be 1 ban per player, so they can ban one of their opponent's decks, whatever they see. Once we get into that screen, you'll see how that kind of plays out. I guess I should ready up since I'm in control of the lobbies. As you see here, the players have the 4 decks. They can ban one of those depending on what they brought as their lineup, what they think is a big counter. These decks cannot share more than 12 cards between any 2 decks, and that is checked individually for each one. So you could have those same 12 cards in all 4 decks if you wanted. Just the other 18 have to be completely individual. How do you feel about this format? Do you like it? What don't you like potentially? Or
I love this format. There have been, I've casted a lot of opens in the past, and there have been a few select players that have been able to really use this time at the beginning of the match to mess with their opponent. I can't remember if it was Rizo, but I think he brought 4 lists with Leia as the deck cover. With the recent addition of being able to change your deck cover, it's actually, you can play mind games with your opponent a little bit. We see LIEKA with 2 pretty obvious choices for, red and green lists, and kind of leaving Dilgarno a little bit in the dark about what exactly his lists could be running. So I mean, deck selection is very important in the Crucible format, and which deck to ban. So yeah, absolutely, I love this format. It gives you your opponent a chance to if they're knowledgeable enough about the game to really cripple their opponent's strategy. Especially if they brought a specific answer to a specific archetype. You really
Right.
yeah.
Even with that being said, I can recall, I forget if it was during an open or the last cup, that we actually had, and again, player name escaping me here, but somebody had basically an all red deck with 3 blue cards in it and used the Banquet as the deck cover. So you kind of throw your opponent off thinking it was all 3 Banquets being as the blue card, but it was actually 2 Shifting Tides in there. So just kind of a very surprising type of thing that you can do where you do get information from this screen, but you don't always get perfect information. And those tech cards, those surprise cards can still come about.
Yeah, absolutely. Leaving your opponent in the dark as much as possible and saving your surprises until later in the matches is very important in these high level games, especially when your opponent expects you to play certain cards. Leaving some cards as surprises, like you mentioned, can be very, very powerful.
One of the other things that is noteworthy as well is you do see dual color cards in there, potentially quad color cards if you're running those, because you'll be able to tell the total deck count of the players. So you'll be able to see something, for example, I think it was Dilgarno, potentially LIEKA's list, looked like a green-yellow sack, and it had 32 cards in it because those potentially Soul Eaters count as 2 green as well as 2 yellow. So you can get a little more information that way. But
True.
Into game number 1 here, we start off with a potentially red control coming out from LIEKA, a yellow Flyers, yellow control. I'm honestly not sure what to call it when you see Azurai in the opening hand here for Dilgarno.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of Dilgarno's little deck building magic with Azurai. Definitely not a card that you see every day in yellow, but maybe he has a plan that we haven't seen yet. But Azurai is definitely one of the less popular yellow cards to be played, without a doubt.
Yeah, definitely is. And now we see the forest, of course, come down from LIEKA and a Taiga Explorer, meaning it is a green-red Crackthorn coming out there. But back on Azurai, I'm kind of wondering if it is a good meta for it now, because we're seeing a lot more decks that are very much based on having a lot of creatures on the board and then running those into each other, much more than potentially in the past, where we saw some just one-on-one creature combat, or you were just trading and then saving up for one big creature. It's interesting to see how that is in the deck is impacted by what's being played right now.
Yeah, sort of coming full circle in a way. We went through a little bit of a swarm phase in the game with blue and green yellow and blue yellow, and now we're kind of back to this big creature meta. But I mean, Last Nightmare and Frogify are still looming in mono blue and yellow lists, so definitely something for players to watch out for in this tournament, playing heavy cards.
Yeah, definitely. Dilgarno with a really nice pickup there, gets the Imperial Drake Rider. Just needed really any creature to get onto the board, otherwise he starts losing some of the presence here. I'm actually very surprised going for a bit of a board swap there with the Axe Grinder up in the top left instead of continuing to push. Generally, red wants to push in between the wells on one side of the board, control that area, because that then sets you up for good Salamander plays, potentially just having your creatures in the right position at the right times. But switching the Axe Grinder to the other side potentially just means if this right side does get contested, he'll continue to have resources available on the left.
Yeah, very interesting choice for LIEKA to run Punishment. Seeing Drake Rider over and over as green-red, instead of playing Firebomb, playing Punishment is an interesting solution to stuff like Queensguard and Drake Rider, 2 very strong cards in red and yellow. But I do agree, maybe building some aggressive lands on the right and continuing to push up that side might have been an interesting option for LIEKA to set up some value plays later in the game. But
I mean, he's still pushing into a good position now.
Right.
Gets the forest in between the wells. If Dilgarno doesn't block, you still get another mountain. Not that it matters as much now being an axe grinder spot because you've already played 2 axe grinders, but it is just a good spot for potentially the ground shaker that we see in hand. And if he doesn't take that, then if Dilgarno were to block it, he could step inside, get a ground shaker potentially closer to the orb. But both players really just a little conservative at the start here. Dilgarno more because he hasn't had the creature to stick on board. He had a big fairy pool built up because he hadn't really been playing anything yet. LIEKA having a big fairy pool built up because he's just collected a lot in the early game here.
Yeah, that axe grinder actually kind of paying off now on the left side for LIEKA. Dilgarno kind of recognizing that could be a problem, out collecting him later in the game, and LIEKA maybe recognizing that he wanted to get some double collection early in the game in case he, couldn't contest the well on the right. But Garridan is always a good answer to anything.
But now we're actually seeing the value of that axe grinder.
Yes, exactly.
It's paid for itself now in the fact that LIEKA's collected 3 Faria from it, but just having that extra available means he played the ground or the Garridan, even though it only deals 3 damage and doesn't actually clear the creature. It deals enough that the Cypher's Wrath finishes it off. Also forces the Last Nightmare from Dilgarno, which puts him in a really bad spot. Dilgarno now really far behind. Something that yellow control struggles with is once it starts to fall behind on board, a lot of its tools are control tools that you're okay potentially losing value on because you're able to control the board and out-collect your opponent with the extra movement that your creatures have. As soon as they start to fall behind like this, Dilgarno went for the +1 fairy on that turn. Potentially will have to +1 into a Last Nightmare again next turn.
Yeah, like you said, yellow with cards like Last Nightmare and especially Azurai really rely on being ahead. So, a big argument against Last Nightmare's popularity is how expensive it is. But with yellow flyers, you can sort of look over that because you're going to be, theoretically collecting a lot more than your opponent due to your mobility. And, LIEKA has just been controlling Dilgarno's board, and he can't do much about staying in the collection game. So that axe grinder now becoming a very big pain in Dilgarno's side.
I mean, we now see it to the point where Dilgarno has to go for this Drake Rider between the wells. It's not set up this way to attempt to actually get the corrupt charge and become a force that can actually contest creatures on the board. This is entirely set up. Oh my god!
Wow.
That Drake Rider was entirely set up just to double collect, and all 4 damage from the Crackthorn goes onto that, clearing Dilgarno's only creature. Like it takes game number 1.
Wow, that also, was insane.
Also, definitely worth pointing out the amount of Faria cost that was in LIEKA's hand there. If Dilgarno had been able to start, the ball rolling for himself and get that collection going, I think LIEKA would have fallen very far behind as well. But that early punishment you mentioned at the time was so huge in taking control of the game. And that axe grinder, very important to have that economy set up in the top left corner.
Yeah, that was an absolutely insane Crackthorn right there from LIEKA, getting all 4 of his damage points onto the Drake Rider and putting Dilgarno just way too far behind.
Dilgarno we see coming out with, looks like a Beastmaster deck next. Should be pretty good against green-red. One of the things that red historically has struggled against is the fact that green can get bigger and bigger bodies onto the board for much more efficient than what red can do. Now, that is aided in Crackthorn by the fact that they have the buffs coming through from green as well. We saw the Tiki Caretaker in LIEKA's hand in the previous game. We see a Salamander here. We know Crackthorn's going to be eventually coming. So is a little awkward just depending on who gets kind of the first buff, can then start to snowball and take control of the game. But we should see both players go towards the same side of the board here, try to just smash their creatures into each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Dilgarno's exact list is here, but both of these decks play very slowly, and I think Dilgarno is going to try to take advantage of LIEKA sort of sitting back and trying to get value off of his Salamander this game. And interestingly enough, Yellow, I feel like would generally beat the green-red, like win the green-red matchup, but, LIEKA just, somehow pulled it out and won that last game. But the Beastmaster does come down for Dilgarno. Going to be generating some value later in the game if it doesn't get cleared.
Yeah, and very smartly by Dilgarno as well, putting that Beastmaster off to the left side. You want it to be in a more protected position where it's not going to get cleared efficiently by your opponent. And then you want to continue to push all your other creatures up the right side. It's a little bit of an investment because you're, putting spending Feria on a creature that's not directly impacting where all the other creatures are fighting. But if you can start to roll a couple buffs, it can actually just mean the game.
Yeah, that Aridin in hand for Dilgarno is going to be, and combined with the Beastmaster, is going to be really, really great this game for him. Getting those in combination with each other can generate a lot of extra value. Creatures that had 4 life originally now are going to be buffed by the Beastmaster. So we'll see what Dilgarno decides to do here.
He's just one turn off as well from getting something like a Feed the Forest. I really love the inclusion of Verdant Emissaries. Of course, a new card that has been released in one of the expansions this year. In a deck like this, it gives the +1/1 buff onto Beastmasters, which then when they come down will buff the next Beastmaster because they get to that 5 life point. LIEKA, of course, has the clear here. You can go for another Ground Shaker, Cypher's Wrath, but this would be so nice to get the buff from one of these other cards, and then that gives the buff to the Beastmaster, which then gets another buff from the Beastmaster, and you just slowly snowball all of these extra stats throughout the course of a game. But Dilgarno about to hit that breakpoint of the 5 forests, so even though LIEKA is in control right now, should be about to swing back because the amount of power that will be able to come down on the next turn for Dilgarno here.
Yeah, I think LIEKA's thinking about clearing that Beastmaster on the left to negate some value. But the second Beastmaster is threatening, and we see the possibility of a Beastmaster Living Willow to stop the progression on the right side.
Yeah, Living Willow is a phenomenal draw here, even just for the fact that you can go Willow Feed in this situation and then potentially find something like a double Therian Golem. Could be really big swing here for Dilgarno.
Yep. Oh my.
And now we see exactly kind of what I was talking about off the start, where green just puts these powerhouse creatures down, and it's very difficult for red to keep up with that. Like, it does have a bit of Feria built up, so be able to potentially do something with the Salamander here, but 7-12 and an 8-13 is something that is going to take a lot of resources for LIEKA to be able to punch through.
Definitely interested to see how LIEKA chooses to clear this. LIEKA did have the possibility of playing the Salamander on that forest where the Ground Shaker is right now, and maybe making another land to the left of it. But
yeah, there was actually a really good play with that.
Yeah.
But it would have required one more Feria right now. Having the Salamander and the Explorer in hand, if LIEKA could have put 2 prairies directly beside where all of these creatures are fighting for, stepped the Ground Shaker over to collect off the well, and then made the Explorer on the left and Salamander in the middle, he would have got 3 buffs as well as the damage, but he just doesn't have the Feria to do it here. So potentially just going for something like a Caretaker play now and then set up for a Salamander next turn.
Yeah, he
it's
couldn't.
So difficult for what to go for right now.
He couldn't even trade his Reveler in either for an extra Feria. It was a little bit too far away. But
the problem here is the Caretaker doesn't really achieve that much for LIEKA. It can go onto the Ground Shaker, and then it survives one attack into the 7-12 Therian Golem. And he's just run out of time here. It's going to go... Okay, he did actually get all the actions in. But But now the Ground Shaker, like, it can get that attack off, but it's still not perfect because the 813 finishes that off, and then the 7-5 can now take, you know, potentially 2 of these creatures.
Yeah, now we see some really nice value trades come in for LIEKA, or for Dilgarno, excuse me.
And actually getting the Grove Guardian down here, if Dilgarno goes for it between the wells, goes for the draw instead, but potentially if he had gone for Forest between the wells, it would have taunted the Salamander in place, and that actually wouldn't have been able to then value trade into the 7-2. It could have protected it that way.
Yeah, that is true. Losing a little bit of value on the golem there, but shouldn't be that big of a deal. Dilgarno is still very far ahead now, sort of swinging the board back in his favor after that one really, really good turn with Feed the Forest.
This does actually play the little more passive play, putting the Grove Guardian in behind, does mean that this trade comes through very nicely for LIEKA to be able to clear that Therian Golem off. But it also means that Dilgarno is potentially in a first trade situation. If the trades had worked out, the Reveler potentially steps up, gets another buff, and can trade into the 8-6 Therian Golem. Now, because of the way that this has played, Dilgarno can decide when and where to move up the board, and then can potentially try to set up a better trade for himself.
Yeah, this is a really, really good turn for Dilgarno. He gets this beefy boar that's going to be charging down towards LIEKA's face, but he doesn't want to go for it quite yet. Not sure why.
No, I think it is right to save for this turn because you can Forest and then actually dash away next turn. If he was to go for the boar here, it does come down as a 6-7, but that does line up for potentially getting a buff, and then that gets traded from the Reveler. This setup was, if LIEKA didn't have a creature, I'm going to dash up into the top left corner, and then he's not going to be able to immediately respond, and he's just trying to pull LIEKA wide across the board. LIEKA just had the creature to respond there.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. I mean, Dilgarno can now save that boar if he wants. He doesn't have to play it now. I mean, you know, he threatened kind of showing that he had it, but he doesn't have to do anything with it now. He has, you know, Faria, he has stuff in hand that he can play. And that Deepwood Stalker will be getting 2 Ancient Beastmaster buffs, potentially.
Yeah, potentially could go up to a 5 attack, which is insane. Clears off the Explorer if he wants to in one shot there. Big thing to keep an eye on now as well is where the rest of our big creatures go from here. We've seen 2 Therian Golems come down from Dilgarno. One still exists on the board, but that means there's only one more he's going to be able to draw. The other potential big stuff is maybe just Grove Guardians, although everything has gotten buffs because Aridin came down so early on in the game, so have to take that into consideration as well. But for LIEKA, Tethra in hand, we know Garridan is in the deck, and all 3 Crackthorns still. So there is the potential that if LIEKA plays this slow enough, he can get enough value out of his creatures to actually take good trades, to deal the damage that he needs, and slowly then push back up the board. It's just much more difficult depending on how slowly Dilgarno plays, because he wants to start to get 1 or 2 creatures set up in an aggressive position and push this stat advantage that he currently has.
Well, maybe Dilgarno is waiting for LIEKA to get aggressive, because right now Dilgarno actually has an amazing offensive push. I mean, he has a Beastmaster into a Boar into a Deepwood Stalker to clear the 5/5 on the left, and he can do all of that this next turn. So if Dilgarno draws into another big creature, he just gets to play a Forest on LIEKA's face, dash his Boar, and then play his Beastmaster and Stalker defensively. And now he's, you know, increased his defense and stats on defense, as well as, you know, made a push for LIEKA's face. But LIEKA does not want any of that as he builds some defensive lands.
I was going to say, and potentially we're just waiting for a Grove Caller as well from Dilgarno, and does find one here, so can move up the board. I think you're right. I think because he went for the draw on the previous turn, Dilgarno was waiting for the next turn to set up a good aggressive Forest. This turn we should see Beastmaster, we should see the Grove Caller go, maybe move the Grove Guardian up and clear the Reveler. That then sets up for... Yeah, Beastmaster comes down, Grove Caller with the move, Then we see the Deepwood Stalker to clear the Explorer on the left, as well as the Ancient Boar. And that just clears everything off the board, as well as putting more and more onto the board. We actually see him go for the Orb with it. Wow.
Well, I thought that Dilgarno was going to clear the 5/5 on the left and then dash his boar into collection on the left, so he could threaten face next turn and still be collecting. But
the only issue with that
works.
is
yeah,
the only issue with going for that type of a play is that a neutral creature or Leica could create a land and actually block the Ancient Boar attack. This setup means Leica would have to play a creature on the mountain directly beside his orb, as well as a creature to the left to actually block both of these from hitting the orb here. So if the boar being in this spot gives it potentially 2 attack angles instead of just 1 if he had gone for the 2-space dash.
Leia is not a bad card to pick up for Leica here. Probably one of his better cards to be drawing against green. And like you said, Leica still has a bunch of cards, so if he can just draw this out a little bit longer and deal with this push from Dilgarno, then there is definitely a possibility for him winning this game. But see, depending on what Dilgarno draws, to stay aggressive or to back off a little bit, could be interesting. Oh, he's going to value trade the Golem, isn't he? Yep.
Wow. All right, big play coming through from Leica there. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of buffs available here. So, and even that, now he's pouring buffs onto a Reveler, which also means that it's going to be 9 Faria if this Reveler were to die next turn, when it's potentially gotten 2 really good trades. So,
yep.
Leica has set up the defenses now. We're going to see another push through to the orb, it looks like, from Dilgarno, and then he's just looking for potentially another Grove Caller to end the game. But right now, it's just a little awkward. Like you mentioned, that Laia coming down is really, really good for Leica. The Reveler trades into something here, and that sets up Laia to then trade into something else once it comes down.
And I would imagine that Dilgarno can just get aggressive now. I mean, now that Laia is, out of the way, we see Dilgarno slowly creeping up the board, and Leica is going to need to be drawing something a little bit more powerful than Guidance in this situation. Maybe something like a Ground Shaker, or just some kind of stats, like a Crackthorn, or something to buff his creatures, or to get some kind of value trades going on Dilgarno's huge board.
Another Salamander pickup's not bad, but there's not a good land here to get a lot of value out of it.
The Tethra is a possibility, yeah.
Yeah, Tethra does get the big buff there. I was trying to see if there was a good clear by swinging the Reveler into the Guardian on the right side, which would have also allowed Leica to collect. And then he would have got the 9 Faria back, potentially go for something like the Tethra. But Tethra onto Salamander just doesn't do enough here. And then Tethra can't come down in a protected enough position, so...
Yeah, Tethra would actually get value traded if it's played on that. Since there's no way to play a Salamander, there's no chance for a buff. He does get to value trade the last... That is Dilgarno's last Golem, so the really big stats are technically out of the way, but with 2 Beastmasters and an Aridin buff, for pretty much every creature that Dilgarno plays from here on out, it's going to be very hard for Leica to keep up.
Yeah, everything gone off the board here, and there's a Boar and a Grove Guardian potentially right in front of Leica's face, and yeah, that's going to be the game. Dilgarno, like we kind of talked about, Beastmaster is a very slow progression. You get all of these stats slowly built up over the course of the game, and you eventually just overwhelm your opponent if you're able to protect them. So looks like we are going to see Leica go to what looks to me to be a Soul Eater style deck. I think it was a 32 card count, and it has 2 yellow as well as mostly green in it. But potentially, yeah, okay, it's going to be more of a Beastmaster green. Kind of wondering what those yellow cards will be. kind of hoping that we maybe see a combo that I've been experimenting around with a little bit, which is something like the Chrysalis Doomsday.
I mean, I'm sure that would be very spicy to see, but
I'm not really sure what those
yeah.
yellow cards would be, considering this looks to be just green Beastmaster coming out from LIEKA.
LIEKA played green yellow, right?
Dilgarno with another really good start here. Getting Aridin and again the Verduran Emissary means potentially a lot of buffs coming down in the early game again for him, but LIEKA also a really, really good start here. Beastmaster down, followed up by Verduran Forces to protect it, and now a Horsemaster as well, which means he'll be able to make a big swing next turn.
I mean, I would imagine that, maybe it is like green yellow, but this is a very different version of green yellow than what we've seen traditionally in the past from LIEKA.
Potentially LIEKA just deciding how aggressive to be here. Can potentially go for something like 2 prairies now and set up a forest next turn, or he can go for the forest now and just set up the Verduran Force, then set up for a Horsemaster next turn. It just ends up being a little awkward the way that you do this, because you want to go 2 neutrals for the Horsemaster, and that doesn't really set you up for the best positional placement of your Horsemaster, because the Beastmaster will potentially have to move back a space, and then you kind of just get all your creatures clumped into an awkward spot, but it is a really good swing to go for.
Yeah, LIEKA definitely taking control of this game more than he was in last game. The Aridin is great to have in your starting hand for Dilgarno, but I mean, that is going to be one big Verduran, especially if LIEKA draws buffs on it.
Usually you want that type of a swing play to be more impactful than just killing Aridin, but the fact that you get the Verduran Force pushing this far up the board essentially accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah, we see Dilgarno protecting any progression for right now. The Emissary not getting a ton of value, so possibly LIEKA's thinking about heading into the Emissary just to, risk that Dilgarno might not have anything else in his hand.
At this point, it's just a matter of, potentially trying to end the game before your opponent gets more and more value. LIEKA is on the front foot and has the Beastmaster, so everything he plays is continuing to be more and more reinforced. Whereas for Dilgarno, it's just a hold on because I had Aridin down early, so I'll be able to eventually catch back up with all of these buffs.
Well, LIEKA has a really interesting thought here. He could play Guidance into Runin. He could Guidance his Verduran and then just play Runin. Or he could just Guidance his Runin, but that's a little bit more risky. Playing into a buff.
I think that's... I mean, it's kind of awkward as well, because you could just clear one of these and then play another Verduran Force. I mean, with another Horsemaster in hand, he could potentially just move the Beastmaster up a step, +1 in Verduran Force on that forest again. It's just really awkward for LIEKA. I think you have to go for the Guidance though, because the value trade is so much more important.
Yeah, no, I think you have to go for Runin in this matchup. This is like the one matchup that Runin is actually good in. The mono green matchup. If you can build your Runin faster than your opponent, that thing can get very big very quickly. So I think that Runin was definitely the best line here. There's really no point to play, to have Runin in your list if you're not going to play it, especially against mono green. Some matchups you probably don't want to be playing it, but LIEKA had the Faria to do it, and it's just going to be something else that Dilgarno is going to have to deal with moving forward.
2 potentially awkward things there. LIEKA traded off the Ancient Boar first instead of the Verdant Emissary when there was only 2 cards in Dilgarno's hand. This gives Dilgarno the chance to actually get another buff from that card, which we see him get because he picked up the Ancient Boar there. Second thing was the dash that LIEKA went for could have potentially meant a value trade, killing off where Dilgarno got a chance to kill off Runen in a good spot. But if he had gone for that, it gives the value trade back the other way to leaving the 10 attack of the Verduran Force alive. So not really punishable in the same way. But we essentially see an extra +1/1 buff onto the Ancient Board that now hits the board because of the trade that LIEKA went for.
Yeah, seeing the Beastmaster is now vulnerable for LIEKA to the boar, but we'll see the Runen help out a little bit. Unfortunately, LIEKA having to trade in his Beastmaster there.
Yep, and that goes back to the way that he originally set up his Horsemaster play. At the time when I mentioned it, it was step the Beastmaster back and then play the Horsemaster where it currently stands. And that would have meant that it was the opposite way around, where the Horsemaster would have been the one that traded right there, and LIEKA still would have had the Beastmaster alive. So potentially just a little misstep in the way that his positioning went, even from turn 3 when that was, maybe turn 4 when that actually happened.
Yeah, really good positioning from Dilgarno as well with the Deepwood Stalker to set up collection on the left side instead of just playing it on the right. After the Deepwood Stalker uses its gift ability, it can just collect for you since its stats aren't great. Definitely a valuable collector. And like a top decking, the Beastmaster is going to give Runen a little bit of extra juice moving forward.
Yep, Beastmaster coming back down now. Like you mentioned, getting that Runen down early in this matchup's really big because you can continue to put it on the board over and over again and just have those stats available at all times. One of the big counters to play around Runen, if you're not running a deck that can, for example, just use Frogify, something along those lines, is to cripple your opponent's economy so they don't have the Faria to play Runen over and over again. That turn, if LIEKA had been able to go Beastmaster and Runen, it would have been so much stats onto the board that Dilgarno has to eventually punch through, or just a way to protect his creatures. Now, even if Runen comes down, Dilgarno's able to clear it, as well as clearing off the Beastmaster, potentially pushing up into a position where he can clear off the Horsemaster eventually as well. So Dilgarno's doing this in a really nice way where he is putting the pressure onto LIEKA's collectors so that he can't reinforce with enough stats to actually protect them.
Yeah, absolutely. Beating Runen, is always sort of tricky, especially when you're, playing somebody that understands how Runen works. And after the Runen nerf, you can, try to cripple their economy even more. That's definitely one of the ways to counter Runen that isn't really thought of. People always jump to Frogify or transformation effects, but in reality, if you can prevent your opponent from collecting, that's just... And, as long as they're not playing Runen, then you're essentially countering it. So very good heads-up play from Dilgarno to get aggressive and threaten that Beastmaster on the left.
Yeah, now LIEKA has kind of an awkward decision of what do you go for. Everything in his hand is really good in certain situations. Verduran Force is the most attack-style stats. The Therian Golem is the most life stats. The Runen, again, as we've been talking about over and over again, you can get those stats to refresh onto the board. The Ancient Boar there wasn't kind of good enough because it didn't have its discounted value, so all the other creatures take over. But he also has Eridan, so is it too late in the game at this point to go for a slow play like Eridan? And LIEKA decides, I think, yes, it is too slow, puts the Verduran Force down, but now we see that that potential value trade now protected by Dilgarno's Therian Golem.
And as long as LIEKA is collecting at least once per turn, he'll be able to continue to +1 into Runen. So it's going to be a little bit, awkward for Dilgarno. He's going to have to, to successfully counter Runen, he's going to have to clear LIEKA's collectors every single turn from here on out, essentially, to prevent Runen from coming back into the game every single turn. So LIEKA does decide to go for the Eridan anyways.
A slow play at this stage, and potentially a misclick, to be honest, out of what was in hand. because the way that the game has now developed, I think it's too late for Aridin. Dilgarno got his down early on, so LIEKA potentially is now trying to catch back up with Aridin of his own and say, okay, I have to absorb the pressure for this turn, potentially absorb the pressure for this turn and next turn, but then I can start to swing the game back. But I think it's just too late for Aridin.
Yeah, there's just too many stats on the board for Dilgarno for LIEKA to do anything about. Runin is pretty much not an option now, since to play it, LIEKA would have to +1, and he also has to make that land across his orb. But yeah, so Runin is not going to be an option this turn.
Should mention as well, as much as I was talking about when LIEKA went for the Axe Grinder in game number 1, this Deepwood Stalker, when you mentioned at the time Dilgarno with really good positioning to play it in the bottom left corner, has been absolutely imperative to Dilgarno actually keeping up the pace of this game. It's just been so much more economy for Dilgarno that every single turn he's had essentially this, basically a 7 Faria pool. I think almost every turn for the past maybe 3 or 4 turns, he's ended with 4 Faria in turn at the end of his turn while still playing a creature. So the next turn, he just has so many more options. Whereas LIEKA, we're seeing, +1 into a 5-drop, +1 into a 6-drop, and use all of his Faria. Dilgarno's just been able to use that extra Faria collection to just fuel all of these resources onto the board.
Yeah, I think Dilgarno could even be okay for drawing here, just to continue that, being ahead and having a constant stream of creatures in his hand. Yeah.
Feed the Forest is a pretty good pickup, but he doesn't really have a creature you want to use it on here.
I mean, yeah, that's something that I think that some newer, people that are playing green might think that, you have Feed the Forest, you have a 7/12 on board. It's like, that's 12 Faria, but Dilgarno doesn't actually need the Faria or the draw badly at all right now. He needs the stats on the board more than anything right now, just to contest, a possible comeback from LIEKA. So holding on to that Feed the Forest for maybe a Living Willow could be imperative if LIEKA potentially comes back.
Yeah, if Dilgarno had a buff in hand, you could maybe Feed the Forest on the 6/11 to try to get another buff, and then you could find lethal that way, or maybe find a Grove Caller and find lethal that way. But something like that is not a line people necessarily think of all the time, where you could Feed the Forest one of your creatures just to open up an attack angle for a second creature. But Dilgarno didn't really have the right setup for that to go for that play, so just doesn't need to use it. Goes for another Beastmaster, just again putting more stats up near his opponent's orb.
Now this is actually interesting. If Dilgarno wants to clear LIEKA can't actually clear that 6/11 this turn. He can hit into it with the 8/8, but it's not going to really do anything. He couldn't step both of his creatures across to clear the 6/11 because they were being blocked by the Ancient Boar. And now that the 8/3 has hit, LIEKA doesn't have the option to play his 3-cost Boar anymore, since the creature dropped below 5 life. He could have played it before, but I think Runin is technically the better line here.
Yeah, Runin does come down. Also could have stepped the Horsemaster across +1 into like a Verduran Force.
True.
But again, you're looking for Runin trade something, Runin dies, and then you go for, potentially another Runin. But there's no reason for Dilgarno to actually clear here. So I think it's draw. If you don't get Grove Caller, attack with the 6/11 and Feed the Forest on that one, so you can try to find a Grove Caller, because that is just a lethal setup for Dilgarno right now.
Yeah, and Dilgarno, or LIEKA, recognizing that there is not much left for him to do in that game. A little bit too far behind, but could potentially come back with one of his red lists, it looks like.
Yeah, Mono Red, we talked about it a little bit in the Crackthorn matchup. Mono Red really struggles against the big stats that Mono Green is able to put down. So will be something that like potentially will feel like he's already going to be behind before the game even starts. Now that can be countered if it's a combat list, which it looks like it's going to be from the Herald of War in hand. If LIEKA can start to snowball early on with a Gift of Steel onto something before Dilgarno's able to get the buffs, he can potentially get value that way. But again, third game in a row, we see Aridin early enough on for Dilgarno that he can make impactful plays with it and get those stats rolling throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, 3 for 3 with Aridin is just absolutely amazing. Definitely the dream setup for Dilgarno. You know, running Aridin, sometimes you don't see it until your bottom 10 cards, and it's far too late at that point usually to get any sort of value. But this has been Dilgarno's first creature for what, 3 games, or you know, one of his first creatures 3 games in a row now, and LIEKA is just not happy about that, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, we even mentioned it in that last game there of how late it came down for LIEKA, of Aridin getting down at that time, which was, you know, potentially only 10 to 12 cards into the game, not even, you know, one of the bottom cards in the deck, and it was still too late at that point. So the fact that Dilgarno's been able to find it this early on is actually just so much more impactful for him.
And the Beastmaster as well. I think this is like the second or third game that he's also been able to play the Aridin and then Beastmaster on the next turn. And Dilgarno very, very happy with his hand right now.
I think I would have liked to have seen Garridan come down there. I'm trying to figure out if it was better to save it just because there's only 1 buff onto this Grove Caller instead of potentially 2. But I don't know, Garridan just feels to me like... I think he's setting up for Garridan and now Cypher's Wrath onto the Beastmaster, but that Cypher's Wrath still could have come down, potentially could have been a Rakoacopter instead. I'm not sure if that was kind of a missed opportunity or if the more passive that LIEKA has gone for would pan out better for him.
I think I like the Garridan to double collect for right now, since the likelihood of Dilgarno building lands on the right is pretty low, especially when the majority of LIEKA's lands are on the left. As green,
I mean, the thing for me, though, is even if you're out collecting, green can still have impact onto the board. It's much more important against mono green to actually undercut them and clear their creatures as early on as possible, because then they don't have the Faria to continually reinforce. So here, you know, yes, there's 5 Faria, but if LIEKA was in a position where he could clear these creatures right now, Dilgarno would have no Faria next turn to be able to play anything. And I think that is more the way to play against mono green than out collecting them, is to stop them from collecting.
Yeah, and what Dilgarno is doing right now on the right side is sort of baiting Garridan into double collecting, but I don't think LIEKA is going to fall for it. I would imagine that he just stays there with Garridan and collects. If you go down and double collect with that Garridan, then you're playing right into a buff that could value trade it. Or even worse, you just, you know, kill Garridan and the emissary dies. The best case scenario is actually for the emissary clearing or hitting into the Garridan is having the command in hand. So the emissary dies, gets the buffs, and you get to clear the Garridan. So Dilgarno very happy with his hand right now.
Yeah, it seems like the deck that Dilgarno, or the list that Dilgarno's running, is much more focused on the buffs coming from the creatures. We've seen Aridin, we of course see the emissaries in here, and then Beastmasters, much more than things like Guidance or Elderwood Embrace. And then we see the Emperor's Command as that, you know, 1 damage ping, or potentially where you need it for the 2 damage decrease on your opponent's creature, rather than Dilgarno just playing the straight up event buffs.
Yeah, Emperor's Command in green has been sort of been getting played more, I think, just because of its versatility and the popularity of Forbidden Library, but it is an all-around good card.
I like it with a lot of creatures in hand right now, but just not like enough good options, I would say. You can put some, Herald of War down and start to get your buff snowballing onto potentially that next Underground Brigand that's in hand. But he really wants to continue to push up the board, and Dilgarno's doing a good job of putting enough stats in the right places to kind of slow that down a little bit.
Yeah, Dilgarno playing this perfectly, letting red come to him, sort of letting LIEKA punch himself out. LIEKA has to be playing creatures to keep up with Dilgarno. The stats on board, but there's just not much to do. I mean, green just has so many possibilities. A Therian Golem could come down and completely stop any progression for LIEKA, or force LIEKA to use a bunch of his resources to trade into the Golem. And
the other thing here is stepping up because LIEKA had already gone for the draw, stepping up the Axe Grinder kind of blocks a little bit, because that is your most aggressive mountain. So he's only able to play one Herald of War here instead of potentially 2 creatures. But this sets up for, if a buff comes out, maybe you get a good Rakowacopter next turn. If the Emissary steps across to collect, then you get the Garrotin trade. So LIEKA is setting himself up in good enough positions to take trades, potentially make a play next turn. But it's kind of just pushing into positions where Dilgarno can make the first step towards a trade.
Yeah, that's so important for green to be in control of trading creatures, especially when you have buffs in your list. Being able to take those surprise trades is very, very strong. See the Golem picked up.
Dilgarno probably looking for a Feed the Forest there. Get Willow feed and then play potentially 2 creatures down. But Therian Golem is a really good pickup, really strong body that, as I mentioned, red struggles to punch through. And I don't think Dilgarno can even go for the collection here. Of course, you mentioned that he has the Emperor's Command in hand to take care of Garrotin, but it's still, you're essentially collecting once to then play a Teferia card. And Dilgarno can't afford that Teferia next turn because he has nothing in his Feria pool right now. He wants to go for potentially a Grove Guardian next turn.
Yeah, definitely looking at the Grove Guardian for sure. The Emissary trade into the Garrotin is attractive for Dilgarno, but I think that saving for the Grove Guardian is definitely a little bit better here, just to get some more stats on the board. I mean, LIEKA does have 11 Feria, which is kind of scary playing against red, but Garrotin is already on the board, and LIEKA's doing well to leave it in a position where it can continue to get value for him. But that's just not going to be enough in the late game when you're playing against green.
I'm kind of trying to think of what LIEKA doesn't have in this deck based on what he played in the Crackthorn. Because I know we saw Ground Shakers there, I know we saw Cypher's Wraths, and then it was also green when he just played a Beastmaster. But I don't think there's too much overlap that, potentially we won't see Ground Shakers here because of the deck building requirements. This play with the Rakowacopter, really nice by LIEKA, even though it doesn't accomplish that much in terms of the damage that it actually does. Blocking that collection, as I mentioned, is so important for cutting down what green is potentially able to play.
Yeah, and all Dilgarno needs is a Feed the Forest right now to get him essentially back into this game with a Willow feed combo. But we're going to see
such a good pickup here.
Yeah.
The fact that you can go for that collection, have the Feria to play the command as well as another impactful creature in the Ancient Boar. Could even go for the Deepwood Stalker if he wants in full clear. But just the fact that he picked up a creature that he could play that is actually impactful onto the board is so huge for Dilgarno here, of reinforcing instead of just attacking in and then not having the Feria for something like a Grove Guardian.
Yeah. Definitely going to see a +1 into a board. Just dash right up the left side and contest the Brigand, I would imagine. I mean, is that playing into Gifts of Steel?
I think
it's a 5/6 board
instead.
But yeah.
But, so the thing is, you wouldn't go Stalker if your opponent had no Feria, because you don't want to give them the extra Feria to make an impactful play. But LIEKA right now has 7 Feria, which means he's going to start next turn with 10 minimum. Collection means he starts with 11, but Garridan's already gone, so it's not like you're expecting that Garridan swing to be what gives like a control back over the board. So in this situation, I think going for the Stalker, even though it does trigger that combat proc and give the extra Feria, doesn't mean that much.
Boar on the right is very interesting.
It's not too bad because he is playing Grove Colors. If you're not playing Grove Colors, then yeah, playing it on the right just means it's so much further away from where the action is actually going to be.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's playing Grove Colors just means Dilgarno's setting up in a protected enough position where, like you mentioned, maybe Gift of Steel is what LIEKA has to make an impactful trade. But here, Dilgarno can attempt to set up the trade on his terms with a Grove Color draw.
Well, and he's playing around Recohelicopter, I think, a little bit. Or possibly Bomb Slinger in Cypher's Wrath. So kind of stepping away, and like you said, the Grove Collars are a possibility, but definitely playing around the Recohelicopter a little bit.
Really like to see Cypher come down up in the very top corner, just because LIEKA then could have set up for potentially like a grappling hook play and try to kill the Therian Golem. Just would have forced Dilgarno to not be able to move the Therian Golem into collection. This type of play also works because he's going for just body blocking so that Dilgarno can't actually collect this turn. But the Stalker is in hand, so Dilgarno can make a play here.
Is that a full clear? No, it's not a full clear.
No, not quite a full clear here. But another value trade into the bottom. Stalker can kill the Recohelicopter. Therian Golem then can step over and kill the Brigand. I think you have to make the land here to step the Boar over, but +1 into Living Willow, +1 into nothing, so you can set up Command and Grove Guardian as a potential play next turn. Seems pretty decent as well.
I think that playing Cypher back is a little bit too obvious with the grappling hook, but I think that it would have sort of still been, a threat that Dilgarno would have to, worry about his positioning more. Not that he hasn't, been doing well so far, but really have to watch out for the grappling hook Cypher combo.
There's just no better place for LIEKA to play Cypher at this stage. And in that setup, Cypher would have contested a Therian Golem, which is the biggest creature, the most stats. And if Cypher gets rolling, it is a way for LIEKA to just end this game. Green has no way to deal with that, if Cypher gets snowballing.
Oh
yeah,
boy.
We're going to see it come down here. So problem here, Grove Guardian in hand for LIEKA is enough to actually contest Cypher. So
oh boy. That's not quite. I mean, he has the clear on the Cypher. Yeah. I think that's what we're gonna see happen here.
+1 into Emperor's Command on Cypher, as well as the Grove Caller, the Boar across. You can even step up so that you can potentially make an aggressive forest next turn. That sets up really nicely. Kills Cypher. Dilgarno has all of these creatures on the board, controls everything, and LIEKA has no way back. We saw Dilgarno play really, really efficiently with his value trades once all of his creatures were... once Garridan was gone and all of his creatures were kind of uncontested.
Yeah, I like using the Emissary to clear, just kind of cashing in on it, getting its value, getting its last words, keeping your Boar healthy. Even though the Boar could have technically value traded, I mean, you have the Emissary, you might as well use it, get a little bit of extra value on the Grove Guardian in hand, but trying his best to get back into this game, but the taunt preventing the aggressive Axe Grinders for right now.
Yeah, probably would have been nicer to see the Mountain and the Axe Grinder get that +1 buff instead of come down as the 4/3, but even still, this is, I think, kind of just entirely in Dilgarno's control right now. I don't think there's any way LIEKA can continue to punch through. even Ground Shakers at this stage aren't enough stats. And I think we've only seen one Therian Golem, so the next one that comes down for Dilgarno, LIEKA will have no response to.
Yeah, there's just not much else for LIEKA to do this game, I don't think. Ground Shaker is here, but like you said, not quite enough. I mean, you can clear the... Oh, you can't because taunt, yeah. I can't remember if Dilgarno played any heal. Oh, he does play command though, doesn't he? Yeah. So burn is not
command
an option.
is kind of the healing instead of Rune's Guidance. But we've also, kind of along those lines, we've seen one Flame Burst already used. The damage that came through from, I think, one Cypher's Wrath, there's potentially 2 of those still to come. Ground Shakers is 1 damage each, but it's just not enough. You need something of one of your creatures to punch through and actually hit the orb at least maybe once. And Dilgarno's just not giving LIEKA any chance to do that right now. So it's not kind of a winning, an eventual winning line that LIEKA has enough damage in the deck to eventually get there.
Yeah, I mean, even if he ends up drawing all of it, there's no way he's gonna have the Fairy to play it. So,
and this, I think, just potentially LIEKA having been a little bit too passive. I think there were plays that he went for that were really good in trying to block what Dilgarno was trying to set up. But the early Garridan going for the double collection, I think, just should have been more aggressive. Just the way to stop green from getting creatures onto the board is stop their collection. And even though LIEKA was out collecting, he just didn't have the stats to actually use his Faeria Pool as efficiently with creatures onto the board as Dilgarno has been able to.
Yeah, and I think that, green as a whole kind of gets a lot of flack. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, green isn't good right now," or "Green is bad," but we see it succeed in tournaments. It's kind of slept on. We saw it take several good matches. I mean, it beat the mono green. I think it beat the green yellow from LIEKA as well, technically. But green has a lot of potential, and we see Dilgarno using it to its full power here against red. Definitely a viable answer to some of the stronger decks in the game right now, but
yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, because we're seeing it do so well against red combat has been kind of coming back since, for a while beforehand, but since the Underground Boss got buffed as well. And green just is a good counter to that because it puts way more stats on the board than red can usually combat. LIEKA potentially has been unlucky this game because we have not seen a single Gift of Steel. So he's either just not playing them or has not found a single of his potentially 3 copies through the first 20 cards of his deck. But also the Ground Shaker that's in hand is the first one that we've seen. That Bomb Slinger is the first one that we've seen potentially could have lined up really efficient trades for LIEKA earlier on in the game.
I mean, I think now you just have to try to push face as much damage as possible for LIEKA.
Dilgarno now pushing up, gets that Emissary in between the wells, and I mean, it's not even a game that Dilgarno has to get to his opponent's orb at this stage. Just a game where he has to control and wait it out. He's a couple cards ahead in terms of eventually getting to the fatigue, and now Runen potentially coming down if he gets that down this turn. If it gets cleared, he gets it 6/6 down next turn, then it starts to snowball, and it can be what potentially just wins it.
Yeah, I think just playing Runen, just dashing straight like into the middle tile on the board on that mountain, and just making a forest to threaten putting a creature there next turn is just going to seal it for...
Yeah, we are going to see that Runen come down, it looks like. Dilgarno, again, just needs to play slow. Doesn't need to do anything too drastic, overextend onto the board. Just controlling absolutely everything that... just kind of preventing LIEKA from doing anything at this stage.
Yeah. A lot of 4 damage cards in LIEKA's hand, but
Firebomb
nothing...
picked up now from LIEKA as well. This is more of just a red control, I think, rather than more of the combat. Even though it's running Herald of War and Underground Brigand. Running bomb slingers, running fire bombs does seem much more control based than I was originally anticipating seeing the deck.
Runin returning to Dilgarno's hand. Could potentially just see the Emissary step up, but I think that we're going to see a more defensive line here just to clear the Ground Shaker and stop the Fairy Collection for LIEKA.
I honestly don't even mind collect, +1 looking forward to next turn, or double Prairie up the right side of the board so you can eventually get a forest, and just go Beastmaster and then Living Willow between the wells. Living Willow's currently a 3/9. It'll get one more buff from the Emissary trading into the Ground Shaker. That goes to 4. Beastmaster would give it another one, so it would be a 5/11 at that stage.
We could even see a Living Willow feed combo this turn. But Beastmaster between the well, interesting.
Just set up for potentially the buff onto Runin next turn and then get your dash that way. But, at this stage, it was just the extra collection here, get something between the wells, and that gives Dilgarno the ability to play potentially 2 creatures next turn, and LIEKA just can't keep up at this stage.
Yeah, that Herald will not be doing much this game. For the rest of this game, rather.
Another Beastmaster, potentially Runin coming down as well for the double buff. Like you mentioned, could go like Living Willow feed, but I think the draw is just because we're so close to the end of the game. LIEKA has 6 cards left in the deck. Dilgarno has 8, so I think Feed the Forest, getting that extra draw, is actually incorrect because Dilgarno wants to stay that much ahead in terms of the eventual fatigue.
I definitely agree with avoiding fatigue as long as possible. I mean, I think that Dilgarno still has some commands left in his list, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't recall how many of the neutral cards were in the deck selection screen, but I think he's only played 1 through the course of the game. I would expect there's at least 2 in the deck, if not 3. So potentially we see that 1. Even if it is just 1, then it'll be the healing that way. Kind of surprised by this in terms of using the Horsemaster, because LIEKA could have gone for a Bomb Slinger +1 into Cypher's Wrath there, rather than creating the lands and Horsemaster, but... And now it's just moving Runin out. That potentially ends the game in a couple turns.
Yeah, I just do not see how LIEKA can come back from this. I mean, Leia is not a bad start, but the command in hand for Dilgarno is going to be...
Leia doesn't remove a card, technically. Leia can kill Runin here, but then Dilgarno gets Runin back.
Right.
So it's not like it actually removes a card. If it was like a Therian Golem, yes, Leia lines up well to kill that, and then, control that forest that currently exists for Dilgarno with the Shimmering Statue being on the board. But the fact that Leia would attack into Runin here, and then Runin just goes back into the hand, Dilgarno can play it again next turn, doesn't actually remove a card.
Right. So Dilgarno sitting pretty nicely in control here. Not much for LIEKA to do except for draw and maybe get some more damage, but that Emperor's Command is going to be tough for LIEKA to get through. Just not enough damage in his deck anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the Shimmering Statue does have the taunt, so it delays Runin that, potentially 1 turn more. The Ground Shaker comes down, but now it's Grovecaller. You can push that 9 damage from Runin right to the orb again.
I don't actually think that's lethal unless there's a buff top decked.
Yeah, and we have not seen any buffs from Dilgarno in all 3 of these games, so I don't believe he's playing any.
Right.
Just playing for the actual buffs that you get from Aridin and
Emissary.
Beastmasters and Emissary over the course of a game.
Yeah, I don't hate that. You know, putting your buffs within, you know, your creatures, getting maximum value out of Beastmaster, not, and Emissary, not clogging your hand up with the guidance and embraces.
There we go. Dilgarno pushing for it now. Can either Cypher's Wrath or Flameburst himself to suicide here, but
No Baldurian.
Baldurian as the last card coming down from
LIEKA hovering his Baldurian in anger, I would imagine. But with that, I think that's just about it. And LIEKA with the...
And there it is, the Cypher's Wrath for the suicide. Dilgarno with a very well played series here with the Beastmaster. Slow and steady does it in the end, just getting all of those buffs out. Again, Aridin early on in the game, so much value. He got to 4 cards left in the deck. That means Aridin hit probably about 20 creatures that game.
Yeah, very, very well done from Dilgarno. LIEKA did have a decent chance at the start of the match, but Dilgarno picked his lists accordingly and successfully countered the rest of LIEKA's lists. So with that, we will be right back with our next match. Should be just a few minutes. So yeah, be right back.